Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge podcast. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today we have the privilege of having as guests two leaders of the Association of American Law Schools, tremendously important organization for the legal academy. We have the current president, Melanie D. Wilson. She is the dean and Roy Steinheimer Jr. Professor of Law at Washington and Lee School of Law. We also have Austen Parrish. He is the dean and chancellor's professor of law at the University of California, Irvine School of Law, and he is the president-elect of AALS, as I will refer to the organization from here on out. So welcome.
Thank you.
See you, Pat.
It's great to have you both, and it's nice to have both the current president and then the future president. We will turn over leadership at the annual meeting, the AALS annual meeting that this year is in San Francisco. But Melanie, you've had a chance now to work through some of the goals that you had, and I was excited when your theme this year was, this is the time for leadership, courage, and action. And so maybe you can share with us a little bit about why you thought that would be an appropriate theme, how you've seen it play out, and why it's important to us right now.
Thanks so much, Patty. I was looking for a theme that really would resonate with everyone. That is deans, faculty members, every member institution. And I think that courage and action is something that everyone has to model every day in the legal academy, and was really excited about that. I thought it really hit the right note for this time. Certainly, law deans across the country have felt pressures from outside sources to speak sometimes, not to speak. We've had pressures on faculty not to engage in certain topics like diversity, equity, inclusion in the classroom. If we're a faculty member that runs a clinic, there may be external pressures not to represent certain minoritized or underrepresented clients. And so I think everyone at this time in legal education really faces this need to sustain courage and act with courage, and most importantly of all, to teach our students what courage looks like as they become lawyers and leaders across the country who really people will look to for guidance and for advice and for good counsel.
Well, I loved the theme when I first read it and agree with you. Certainly circumstances in and out of the academy demand that kind of leadership. As you've gone through the year with AALS, you've also had the opportunity/challenge to work with a new executive director. So now Kelly Testy, who has been a guest before, is the new executive director of AALS. And so I'd like to ask both of you, at this time of opportunity and transition for AALS, what do you see as the most important responsibilities that the organization has?
So I'd start off by saying, as president, I thought it was a real honor and a privilege, but also a challenge to ensure a smooth transition. As you talked about, Kelly Testy is a very well-respected, great leader in legal education, having been a dean, having been the CEO of another institution that really matters to legal education. But also, Judy Irvine had been our executive director and CEO for a decade, and she had really strong leadership, also having been the president of AALS and a dean herself. And so it's very important, right, to make a smooth transition. And as president, one of the things that I was especially keen on was making sure that that transition was smooth, and that I did whatever I could, and the executive committee did whatever it could to make that transition smooth. And I think it's been amazing. To incredible leaders. It's really just, they exemplified what it should look like when you hand off that responsibility from one great leader to another. And so that's been fantastic. I'll stop there and let Austen weigh in. He's obviously served on the executive committee for quite a while.
Well, I share with what Melanie says, what a treat to be in leadership of ALS at the time that Judy was completing her fabulous term, and then to see Kelly step in, and Kelly's been around for a while and has some great insights. And I should say, what a privilege for me to be able to work with Melanie as president and then Mark Alexander as past president, two great leaders. And, you'd asked what's the ALS doing at this time and why it's important. And for new faculty coming in, there's no organization that provides sort of better support and an insight into the scholarly and teaching community, and also the way that faculty give back in broad ranges of service on a national level than ALS. And so it's a great place for new junior faculty to get acclimated to the legal academy. And it's one of the focal points for more senior faculty to be able to interact and connect, both on a scholarly side, but also to think about what it means to be a fabulous teacher. And so it's an exciting time to be part of an organization that's really at the forefront of thinking about broadly the faculty side of legal education, and then even more broadly that the way that we support our students as schools and as institutions. So great time to be at ALS at a time when this transition's occurring and when there's a lot of excitement there about the future.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the role that you all play in training new faculty. One of the things that I was so excited about this past year is that AALS has also branched into providing some training for adjunct faculty and also some opportunities, and I don't know that I call it training, but some programming for emeritus faculty, really looking at all the people that we have in the classrooms teaching our students. I think that's so very important. So thank you to AALS for expanding that programming to include some of the other important role models in our classrooms. It's an interesting time to be a dean, as you both know. You are deans at law schools that are subsequent to other deanships that you've had. So you have more experience than I do. I'm in my 5th year as being dean, but boy, oh boy, it is hard to hire talented faculty. And so I wanted to ask what your thoughts are as AALS leaders about how we can change this dynamic of many fewer people, it seems, wanting to go into legal education teaching versus the huge need we have with 200 law schools across the country.
Well, maybe a couple of thoughts here. I think one, we need to continue to do a good job of communicating what an amazing profession it is, and part of that is sometimes people outside the legal or legal academy have sort of a caricatured view as to what we're actually doing, and although there's certainly some up down times and down times, and even as you suggested, deans, there's some challenges. It's an amazing job, and what an opportunity to be able to shape the next generation of leaders. That's both on the student side, but also on the faculty and staff side. The second thing might be is, and I think this sort of ties in nicely to your earlier comment about ALS expanding this resources for adjunct faculty to emeritus faculty to mid-career. It's not that we have a dearth of talent. In fact, we have amazing people that are applying. It's that we need to continue to broaden the way that we view who are going to be the superstars of tomorrow and make sure that we're not using proxies to limit our view as to what a quality new faculty member should be. Part of the work around diversity and inclusion is making sure that we're creating pipelines into the legal academy for talented faculty that are coming from non-traditional backgrounds or underrepresented groups. And part of it is making sure that lawyers who may not think that they're the type of person who could be a great faculty member realizes that there is a pathway, and that pathway doesn't require 10 years of doing fellowships and being in the trenches on some fairly elite programs. Nothing wrong with those programs, but that there's other pathways to be able to make a difference and an impact. And so I think you're right. We've seen a decline in the number of people that are formally applying, but the reality is I think we're also seeing a movement among law schools to broaden the definition of who would be a successful member of the academy. And I think ALS can continue to play a critical role in making sure that those pathways and the support exists for people that may not be coming through sort of a traditional, I did a PhD, I then did a fellowship at an elite school, and then I'm applying for my first faculty job. But I'm sure Melanie has better thoughts than I do on that. But I think we've seen these big changes in the last couple of years, and I think it's to the credit of ALS leadership, Judy and Kelly, about thinking about how we broaden the support to a wider range of people who are interested in joining the academy.
I agree, Austen. I think you make excellent points, and I guess I just buttress a couple, and that is, I had the privilege of going to the new law faculty conference to welcome them and participate on a panel, and I was struck by the number of people who were not yet in tenure stream jobs. They were included, and I think that's very important as we try to, as Austen says, really broaden the pipeline. I think the programming for adjunct faculty, for example, is another really important thing because oftentimes, especially people who are non-traditional in their path possibly to law teaching, they very well may start off as an adjunct professor rather than doing a vet, right? And if we have the programming squared away right, they get the messaging early on about the ways that they might dip more than a toe in and then make a real impact and get in. And I think the other thing that's important is that we're seeing more first-generation law professors and more minoritized law professors. And as we have those role models, also networking, I think that shows people, right, like there is a pathway for you even if you're not on a traditional professional path. And then the last thing I'll say is, and this is something that Kelly Testi has really spearheaded, but it's important for us to continue to gather information, data about what does the faculty look like. And we're even through the recruiting process, so the faculty recruiting process that we've traditionally used, we're broadening the demographic information that we're beginning to gather so that we learn even more information. And Patty, I think you are aware, and I know Austen, you are, that also AALS is doubling down on the research that they do and have partnered again with Newark out of Chicago to do a study on faculty as opposed to the past study on deans. And so we're really gathering more information. I think as we gather more information, we can communicate more information about pathways to the legal profession, because I agree with Austen. I think there are so many talented people and these jobs are so enjoyable and rewarding. And we just got to get the connection between the people who might want and be really great at these jobs and give them the communication that they need to get there.
Well, I completely agree. And the path looks different than it used to. It used to be very rigid and you had to check those boxes that Austen mentioned. And now there are some of us, myself included, who did start as an adjunct 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe, no, 20 years ago, where people would say, oh, that's never a path to full-time employment. Well, now that's not the case all the time. So I'm glad that you're continuing those efforts. I'll look forward to the faculty survey webinar that you have upcoming. And I guess the last thing I'd say about this is I wonder too if we spend as an academy a lot of time within our sphere, our kind of echo chamber, talking about faculty and pipeline development and all of that. Maybe there's a role for us to play in exposing what we do and how we do it to practitioners across the spectrum in a way that they might learn about it and not have to be connected to AALS already. You know what I mean?
I think that's a great point. I think one of the challenges in legal education is making sure that the gap between practice and the academy isn't as great as sometimes it's perceived. And that doesn't mean that there isn't differences. It's a different career path, and it's the skill sets that are required to succeed in private practice or in government practice or public interest practice is a little different than what it is to succeed in the academy. But I think sometimes the gap between the two is overblown, and the perception is that what we're doing is radically different when in fact it's actually closely aligned and increasingly closely aligned. The biggest innovations, I think, over the last decade or more has been how attuned many faculty are to the needs of practice and preparing students for practice in a way that perhaps wasn't the focus 30, 40 years ago. And so I agree with you entirely. I think we need to continue to keep that communication. I think law schools are stronger when they're closely connected to their communities and the legal profession that they serve. But I also think we also got to be careful that we don't make that gap seem bigger than it actually is.
Absolutely. Melanie, when you think about this year that is mostly over, right? As president, it's hard to believe, but you were president-elect before then. And so in your time in the penultimate leadership position at AALS, what can you share with us that you're most proud of that has happened so far and what you're looking forward to between now and the end of your term and the annual conference?
I think the thing that I'm proud of is not something that, that's necessarily stood out. And that is that we've continued the amazing programming and continued to focus even more on faculty and how we can support them in ways that they really need and want. I think that support, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, right? Like it might be the adjuncts, it might be they're at the arc of their career, it might be that they are more senior, it might be that they're now emeriti faculty, but really figuring out how to support faculty the entire way. And then also really getting the word out about what AALS can do for people, how it can support people. So for example, you probably know well, but there's lots of important programming for deans, for example. If I'm worried about academic freedom or I'm worried about artificial intelligence, I don't have to go and do it all on my own. There's the web pages, anti-racism, right? Like just making sure that we're continuing to find the right support systems for faculty and for deans and doing that in a way that's really more behind the scenes, right? But I'm really proud of that. And we do have I think an amazing program coming up in January in San Francisco. Really looking forward to that. Some great programming. I think that one of the things that also we've continued to do, and it's really just a great group of deans and leaders, other leaders on the executive committee. It's certainly not me as president. It's a great group. But I think we continue to focus on how can we be more accessible right? Like, I think there can be this idea, which I don't think is true, that we're somehow exclusive, that only so many people are going to get on so many panels. But I think we've done a nice job of continuing to get the messaging out that we are an organization for every faculty member and every dean, regardless. And I'm really proud of that. And that's something that I didn't create. That's something the executive committee, in conjunction with, these great executive directors, have just kept the momentum going.
Before I turn to you, Austen, I wonder if you all can share, I mean, either of you can share this, but if I'm a faculty member or a dean and I want to get involved in AALS leadership, how do I do that? I'm glad to hear it's not exclusive, but what path might I take to get more involved?
Well, there's lots of ways, right? One of the fabulous things about ALS is how big it is and how much of the organization is driven by volunteers. There's hundreds of sections that faculty can volunteer and fairly quickly take leadership roles within areas of expertise or areas of interest through the section leadership process. We're always looking for people to volunteer for individual committees, and every year there's an opportunity to submit a name or nominate others for committee leadership. And so that's another great way to sort of get connected fairly quickly to the organization. There's lots of other ways, right? From volunteering for site visits to the ABA, where the ALS will send a member, to just showing up to the panels and making yourself known to people that are currently in leadership. Attending the meeting is the obvious way to get connected. And it's amazing how many young faculty members I'll talk to who go to their first or second ALS meeting and realize that they're creating a network that has made a massive difference in the way they think about their obligations, either to think creatively about what they're doing in the classroom or about their research or the way they engage with their community. I might at the end, I think Melanie might have undersold herself on the answer to the last question. The biggest thing, we mentioned this, but what an amazing transition, have the smooth transition between Judy's long-term leadership to Kelly's new leadership, having the staff pull together and make that seamless transition, and then to continue, as Melanie touched on, some of the great programs, the new resources that have been put up on the clearinghouse, including the health and wellness programming that's been available for Dean, the almost seamless transition to the Dean's Dialogue, and the great meetings that we've had as an executive group. So I take my hat off to you, Melanie. I think it was an amazing year. I think we'll look back, we're about to come up to the 125th year anniversary, and I think we'll look at this as being a high point of ALS transition, a very smooth transition into its next chapter. And so congratulations, Melanie, and kudos to you for an amazing presidential year.
Well, you're very kind, Austen.
I couldn't agree more. AALS hasn't missed a beat. I mean, in no way. And in fact, has increased the opportunities for us to communicate and gather with a new web interface and listserv operations. And recently, a Dean's List that is new for us and separate from our accreditor, and a huge asset to those of us leading institutions. Austen, what are you looking forward to in your presidential year? Can you give us a preview of what we might expect or what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, I'm excited. We were mentioning this. We are going into the 125th year anniversary of ALS, and that will happen formally next August. But what a time to take stock at the impact of the organization over the last 125 years and how that impact has sort of connected with changes that have happened in society and big changes in legal education broadly. We'll have a new book coming out celebrating the 125 years of ALS history. And in the annual meeting in New Orleans, we're going to take a retrospective, trying to figure out the different ways that legal thought has changed and has been impacted by leaders in the legal profession and through ALS, kind of recognizing that we all stand on the shoulders of giants in different ways and trying to make sure that we recognize who those giants are in particular schools of thought, but also in particular ways that legal education has innovated. I think sometimes there's a tendency to think that there's not much innovation in legal education, that we move slowly. But the reality is there's been tremendous changes, and it's expedited and become even faster over the last few decades. Changes in the way we teach, changes in the breadth of our research and the way we think about pressing issues. And then frankly, an amazing role that law schools have played in the economies and the well-being of local communities, and trying to take stock of what those impacts have been. And so I think a lot of next year is going to be focused on sort of retrospective, taking stock of where we've come and where we're going. And I'm excited about that. And I'm very much excited about the fabulous idea of Judy Irvine to put together a book to celebrate the 125th year anniversary. And I know Kelly Testy's excited about that too. And I'm looking forward to that book coming out.
Well, and it's wonderful that Melanie will get to participate in all those activities as well, since she'll be past president at that time. But talking about the retrospective, I'd like to look at the bookend to that and ask both of you, with your tremendous experience in the academy and at multiple law schools and in leadership roles in law schools and in our national organization, what are your predictions for the future of legal education happen in the coming decade? And I will take Melanie first.
The two things that stand out to me is we're going to continue to see just tremendous technological advancements. And the good thing about that, right, is that lawyers, we operate in the gray spaces. We train our students to prepare to adapt, be adaptable, right? But I think that's going to be a real both challenge and opportunity for lawyers. And then the other thing is, I think we're going to see real resistance to the bar exam and continued adaptation and questioning and critiquing of whether the bar exam really has much value at all if we're just trying to protect consumers, especially when we're all worried about access to justice. And we know that there are big gaps in access to justice and certainly legal deserts, as people like to call them. I think those two things, technology is going to continue to change. We're going to have to continue to adapt. And as Austen recognized a minute ago, I think law schools have done an amazing job at adapting to new technologies and new needs in the legal profession. But I think the bar exam is just, we're going to eventually decide that that is just not all that useful for what we're trying to measure. And we're going to have to go in a different direction.
Yeah, I share what Melanie says. I think those are going to be big issues. I think we're going to continue to see kind of cycles. Right now, the economy is fairly strong. The legal profession is fairly strong. We're seeing good hiring rates for our students. We're continuing to see the expansion of access into legal education throughout the country. I think those things are going to continue. I do think we're going to continue to see financial pressures on law schools. That certainly has been true for a long time. I don't think that's going to change. One of the things I think that's not necessarily well understood by the profession itself is that, or there's a tendency, I think, to think that law schools are, sort of the old stereotype of the ivory towers, and not realizing that pressures that have occurred on law firms and legal profession broadly with sort of nationalization and globalization of the legal profession also impacts law schools. And so I think you're going to see continued greater competition among law schools. I think we're going to see pressures on regulators. We're seeing we've seen an increase in regulation by the American Bar Association, and we've seen interest in the state courts and in thinking about getting into questions of licensure and regulation the way they didn't previously. And I think, that's got to settle out as to what are we trying to achieve and what are we trying to accomplish. I think if you look back, one of the great success stories of American legal education has been innovation. And although we're critical of ourselves, the rest of the world, I think, looks at us fairly strongly at the rigor in which we've been able to sort of maintain, frankly, a model of legal education that is admired throughout the world and often tried to copy. And so the question is, how do we continue that going forward? And so I think there'll be some interesting questions about how we do that. I agree. I got a feeling we're going to see greater innovation on the licensure side of things, both as a way to sort of make sure that we can close some of the access to justice gaps that we're seeing in parts of the country, and also as a question about what we're trying to do. Are we excluding people that would make strong lawyers arbitrarily in a way that's not designed to protect the profession, but rather is more protectionist? And so I think we're going to continue to see discussions around licensure. But I think it's also an exciting time to be in legal education, right? I don't know about both of you, but each year I'm in this role. Each year I'm more amazed about the quality of the students that are coming in. And although there's generational gaps, and increasingly I think they view me as 2 or 3 generations separated from them, I'm amazed about the quality of the students that are coming in, both their ambitions to be fabulous lawyers, their commitment to making a difference in a wide range of ways, but just their energy and excitement. And so I think the future from the student perspective is great. And I see the same thing when we look at new faculty that are coming in. The skills of those new faculty, I think, it used to be that you'd have a faculty member that was only interested in scholarship or only interested in teaching. And that's rare now. You see faculty that are deeply committed to their students, who are deeply engaged about thinking about how they make a difference in communities as they define it, but are fabulous scholars doing really important work, at the same time care deeply about what they're doing in the classroom. And I think that's a great recipe, at least from a dean's perspective. And so I'm fairly ambitious for the future of legal education, about the impact we're having. And certainly, if you look throughout the United States, law plays a special role. It plays a special role not only in the major debates, but also in solving the biggest challenges that society has. Law plays that role, and lawyers do. And I'm pleased to have a small role in hopefully graduating the next generation of people that will be thinking about those issues.
Well, I share your optimism, and I appreciate the thoughts from both of you about the future. I'll say that after getting to know both of you and having this conversation with President Melanie Wilson of the AALS and President-elect Austen Parrish that I am optimistic even more because you all will be at the helm when we are facing some of these challenges as an academy and as a profession. So thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the leadership of AALS.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and always good to talk to both of you.
Yeah, Patty, great to see you. Thanks for interviewing us. What a privilege. And Melanie, always good to see you.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. And if you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you'll listen to other thought leaders in the Academy on your favorite podcast channels.